flight home from Holland this past year, I bought a copy of today's Quilter to read on the plane. And there was this beautiful harvest project that I liked. And when I read the bio of the designer, Paula Hope, I saw that she was also a technical editor. I was curious about what exactly a technical pattern editor did. So I reached out to Paula to tell us all about it. And she said yes. So grab your sewing and a cup of tea, and here's my interview with Paula Hope. So welcome, Paula, to the podcast. Whereabouts in the world are you coming to us from?
So I live in Scotland. Glasgow is in the west of Scotland, sort of lower Scotland. So I'm slightly south of that.
That's where my ancestors came from.
All right.
Ayrshire?
Yeah, well, so we're the last bit out of Glasgow. Next is Ayrshire. Isn't that funny?
Are you originally from Glasgow?
I am. Yeah, my family are from Aberdeen, which is in the north. And they came down here. But yeah, I'm born and bred from down here.
So I understand that you studied silversmithing at college.
I did. I actually started off doing drawing and painting and at Edinburgh Art College, and I was a bit homesick. It wasn't for me. When I look back now, I'm very aware everything I do is with my hands. I like to make. And at that time, I couldn't put my finger on it, but drawing and painting was I enjoyed it. I was good at it, but there was something missing. And I can say that now because it sort of dawned on me as I've got older, everything I do is with my hands. And yeah, I went into silversmithing and jewellery at Glasgow Art School, and I really loved that, actually.
Was there a particular type of jewellery that you like to make?
Not really. I was kind of interested in base metals as opposed to precious metals. So I used a lot of gilding metal, which had copper. You could have that the colour of brown, dark copper, where you could shine it up like brass. And with it silver, I quite liked that. When I came out of art school, I fell into a job that was in community arts. Just because I came out and I had to find a job, it was temporary, and then fell into teaching after that. Everything's just happened by accident with me. I've just said, okay, let's give it a go.
What age of children were you teaching?
Secondary, so from 11 to sort of 17, 18.
So were you teaching them all types of art?
Yeah, so they start off with the basics in S1, and you would... I didn't do it for very long. I did it for only a few years. It brought out in me everything that I like. So I enjoyed the drawing and painting. I enjoyed the hand making. It brought out in me something I saw later on in the quilting teaching I ended up doing, which is people can be the inspiration. So when people are interested in something, I think they can bring out the best in a teacher, and you're aware of somebody's ability or a way to challenge them. And so that kind of worked for me. I can say that looking back on the bits that I enjoyed in it. So you're teaching them art history, you're teaching them basic drawing skills, and then craft skills also.
How long have you been sewing?
Since I was very small. My mother was a dressmaker and embroiderer. I wanted to do it too. My dad was an architect, and my dad was always making too. So there was a lot of that going on. It's just rooted in. I think it's a calm place. It's always been. My mum had a sewing machine when I was little, and I got one when I was 5. I didn't like mine because mine was a tabletop one. You turned the handle, and it was just a little toy one. And my mum's, you plugged it in, and it went, racing on. And I kind of thought, well, what's wrong with mine? This isn't the same. My mum said she once made a suit and she left it out on the dining table. It was finished. And when she found it, somebody had taken scissors to it.
Not naming any names.
Well, not naming any names. I think I can kind of half remember these enormous scissors that I can remember the sound of the scissors when my mum used them, and I can remember hardly being able to pick them up and cut. But I can remember a moment going, oh, I did it. I just remember that. And that must have been vandalizing of my mum's. She's not held it against me.
Wow, that's very generous of her. So when did you make your first quilt?
Do you know my first quilt is still in bits? I think my first proper quilt was for my eldest daughter, and she's 27. I've made little things all the way along. I think the first quilt was a baby's quilt when I had her. It took me a year. It took me a year to make something I can make in a day now. which is quite funny. But it was all hand sewn flying geese, everything quilted. I didn't think it was proper quilting if you used the machine. I thought you did it all by hand.
I had some funny things when I approached my first quilt too, because I was thinking quilting had to be hand done. So I used a really long stitch length, thinking, well, that's what it would be if you were hand quilting it.
Yeah.
I got straightened away pretty soon.
Yeah, me too. I think I made the first one and then I thought, hang on a minute, because you're making one, you're thinking, I've seen another. I really like to make that, and you end up with a list, and then that's you're away. And it's okay to mix hand and machine, I think.
Yeah, I don't have any problem with the people that mix. And it's funny because some people will hand quilt it, but they'll machine piece it, or
Yeah,
vice versa. They'll do
yeah,
one but not the other.
yeah. Quilts are beautiful, whatever way they're made, I think.
So when did you start designing and publishing your patterns?
Well, I think I could probably say I've always designed them, in that I've always just pieced quilts and played about with fabric. So, and because my background was design at art school, I've just never thought of not doing it my way. When I was pregnant and I did that first quilt, my mum started going to a class. And I kind of thought, why are you going to a class? What do you need to go to a class for? And she said, oh, we use a rotary cutter. We don't do it your way. And I was like, okay. So I thought, right, I'm going to make a quilt for this baby. So I went along. And then when I came out of it, I just ended up, even that baby quilt actually was my own design. The teacher obviously said to me, look at magazines and books, but that was just me. I then ended up teaching that class that I went to. That was at a college in Glasgow. I did go into that class thinking at that point I was still teaching in the schools. And I did go in thinking, gosh, this would be a great job. Ended up that teacher retired and I ended up replacing her. And so I was making patterns then, because people would come in with fabric, they would come in with some sort of an idea. What do I do with this? How do I take this? And I would end up designing on the spot. The first time I had one in an actual magazine was about 2018. That was the first time I think I had one in a magazine.
Did you just blindly send it, or did you have some contacts?
I blindly sent. I had a conversation with my husband. I'd been teaching for quite a while in quilting classes, workshops. It was evening classes, there were day classes and things like that. And I had a conversation with my husband, and it was about 2017. And I had thought about in some way changing the path a wee bit. It wasn't that I wasn't enjoying the teaching. I just was aware when you teach, you're making for everybody else but you. Everything I designed was for workshops or for the class, or, so I felt that I wanted to do things more for me. So I decided to try and contact magazines in this country. And I made a list and I sent off emails and I got 3 replies. And one was a yes. That was Quilt Now magazine, that is now no longer in print. And the other 2 was the one I work for now, and it's Sister Magazine. And they were very nice. From the other side of it, now working for them, we tend to use designers that are maybe known. So I wasn't obviously known. So they were very polite and, thank you very much. But it was Quilt Now was the first one.
Did you find the process daunting?
No. Technology-wise, a little bit, because I wasn't hugely experienced. I used InDesign. So I had Adobe, and I was learning that. So diagrams they didn't flow the way they do now, but I was capable. I'm very much, you give it a go and you'll get somewhere. There's this word, and I still see people that were in my classes and they laugh when I use this word, because I'm forever saying, oh, you just do this. And this word, I take it for granted because I just do it, but a lot of people hate that word.
I have it in the title of my book.
Well, yeah, just see that, yeah. Well, you just do, don't you? You just kind of give it a go.
Well, and there's some times where I think life is too short to be wasting time worrying about this. It's not that I don't do it. Sometimes I do overthink, but most of the time I'm just like, just do this.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think I'm saying that to my children, like, give it a go and, you'll land somewhere and you'll learn from it. Next time it will work better.
You submitted your first pattern and you got published. When did the technical editing become part of it?
So that was the pandemic. So I had a conversation with my husband that I might consider coming out of some of my teaching responsibilities. But I found that really difficult because when people come to classes, they really love the class and they're really attached to the class. And I felt really mean breaking their hearts by saying, okay, I'm going to stop doing this. I felt bad about that. So I never did it. And we just carried on. Well, so it was the pandemic happened and it was taken out of my hands. That was that. Everybody was at home. I have to say, I lost my sewing mojo entirely. I forced myself to sew every morning for an hour, just cutting strips up, sewing together, because I really lost my mojo. Must have been a couple of months in. Zoom had started, and I had thought, oh, right, Zoom, people are using Zoom. I thought, there's no way you can do quilting over Zoom. How do you do quilting over Zoom? You know, you need cameras, you need, you know, and we didn't have any of that. And nobody knew what Zoom was. Anyway, one of the ladies in one of the classes asked, well, what about if we do a chat? So we started a chat each week. We started a block a week. So I designed a quilt, and each week I designed like a page. It was a page. So it meant that I was working on InDesign and Illustrator. And because I wasn't doing anything else, I was learning about that, teaching myself. My kids were better at it than me. So they were pretty good for, you know, advice, especially my older daughter on Illustrator. And then it was maybe in 2020, there was an Instagram post from Today's Quilter. They were looking for a technical editor. I read it and I thought, gosh, that's right up my street. I love quilt maths. I read it and I thought, they wouldn't want me. I'm in Glasgow. They're in Bristol. The office is in Bristol. I messaged them through Instagram and asked, would you consider somebody who doesn't live near Bristol? Now, at that time, there was, you know, people were working remotely. My husband works for a national newspaper and he was doing it from one of the upstairs bedroom, which was, you know, you would never have thought that. Anyway, they said if it was the right person, yes. So I applied for it, thinking I'm too old, I'm not going to get it, I'm nowhere near Bristol, it won't be for me. And turns out it's a great pair of gloves.
Well, I think there's two types of people, you know, one that enjoys quilty math and the others that don't.
Totally.
So tell me, what do you do as a technical editor then?
It's really fun. It's, you know, very varied. When I applied for it, I had this vision I'd be making quilts. And that was one of the questions I asked. So, you know, I asked the other technical editor in the other magazine, so do you make the quilts? Everybody asks me, do you make the quilts in the magazine? And now I laugh at that because the magazine's going, you know, we're working on so many issues at a time. There's no way. What we do is designers send in their patterns. We have to format it to fit the magazine so that there's a uniformity throughout our magazine. And I have to make sure that all the pieces are listed, the maths work, the fabric quantities are correct, the diagrams match. Not everybody uses InDesign or Illustrator. Some people will use something else in it when they send in photographs. They're not of a quality we can use to reprint in the mag. So I would maybe have to redraw. I try and redraw them exactly how the designers sent them. So I try and use the same colors. So I do all that. Design cover gifts, make projects with cover gifts. I mean, I do have a say. The editor is the person who decides what happens in the magazine, but, you know, we have conversations about it, and I guess I'm the quilt expert. So she will ask, you know, I find that funny that I'm a quilt expert, but she'll ask my opinion on things.
So what are cover gifts?
Well, with each issue, there's something you get free, and it might be templates, you know, like plastic templates for Applique.
Yes, the volume that I got, I picked it up as I was coming home from Holland, and it had a little envelope with all sorts of templates for the quilt that you designed.
Yes.
It was a wreath. It was like a harvest.
Oh, yes.
Harvest festival quilt.
Between myself and the editor, we try and come up with ideas. It's very difficult because you're trying to think up new things, and there's nothing new really in quilting. But yeah, you're trying to think up new things. You know, when I was teaching, one of the things I used to do was always have a strip of cardboard with holes in it for drawing circles. You know, and you're drawing large circles, and it's like an old-fashioned, you know, nail with a string. So we did that one time. We did this little ruler for drawing circles, you know, and I dare say that lots of people got it and thought, what's this? But it's like, no, look at the pictures. This is a really useful thing. The shapes tend to be, some people might use them, some people might not. They're handy for quilting. I mean, you can bond a web applique. You don't have to needle turn. To me, it's things to put in your sewing basket, and one of these days something will come. The one behind me, actually, that was a cover quilt, and actually the frames around the circles, they were a cover gift. There were 9 different shapes to go around a 9-inch circle.
I think that's called the Dutch sampler, I think.
It is, yeah. That's because these are Dutch fabrics. I bought them in Holland did you go to the Amsterdam shop?
Yeah, Petra Pryn, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we stayed in a small town near the German border at the south, and the town was called Zuffen. But Petra Pryn has a shop in Zuffen. Like, of all the places in the world, it was there. And that's where we actually met her, and she did a trunk show for us with her partner.
Oh, yeah. My daughter was living in Amsterdam. She was studying architecture, and she did a year in Amsterdam. So it was quite a treat going to visit her.
Ever since I saw this Dutch sampler, as I was researching you before this interview, it has held my attention, those borders with those blocks on point.
Yeah, I love that. So the big wide sashing. So the squares are the Dutch. And then these fabrics were all from a shop up north in Scotland. And it was one of those ones I was actually going to do it differently. I was going to mirror the circles and have more circles happening. And I went to the shop and bought piles of fabric, and I can't remember the name of the fabric. Oh, it's like grunge or something. And you can use both sides of the fabric. So one side has a texture, the other side, the way it's made, is like a plain. So you get 2 fabrics out of one. I love that. And it also means that you're getting a very close color. And I had a pile, and when I brought them out and I had them laid out, I was like, no, I just think we don't need any more circles. And the maths on that quilt worked out beautifully. And it basically came out at 5.5 by 10.5 or something like that. It was just like by accident. And I mean, if you love quilt maths and you just sew something as a sample and you're like, Eureka, that's amazing, and that unusually for me, so I like a quick technique. If I can save a bit of time with some things, unusually for me, I cut all the squares and triangles individually so that I could really spread the color about. And actually, I think that's what made, the quilt, because I really love that. This is in my kitchen. I'm in my kitchen and it's hanging on the wall.
If somebody has designed a pattern and they would like to submit it to a magazine, what kind of advice can you give them?
Just have a go. Do it. You never know. Yeah, just do it.
Is there anything in particular that magazines are looking for?
I think one of the things actually we were talking about not so long ago, there's nothing wrong with mixing older fabrics and new fabrics. I think designers, when they're making fabrics, you've got to be true to what you think color-wise. I think if you try and be something you're not, the probability is it won't work. And when things don't work, you get a slightly ugly quilt. Do you know what I mean? But I think if you are truer to yourself, you can have a success with your design. I think if the way it works just now, it seems to be, is that it's online presence as well. I think you have to work with that a little bit. I was very lucky. I'm not a very Instagrammy. I do Instagram, but I'm not hugely Instagram. I came in through a side door, I think. And I think, the editor knew that I made quilts and knew that I did, but I don't think she knew until she knew me more what I do. And I'm pretty prolific, to be honest, in all sorts of ways. I think that's what it is. I think just keep doing it. Sew and write patterns nice and clearly. I'll tell you, if you're writing a pattern, look in a magazine at how we lay out a pattern and use that as a sort of skeleton for how you would lay out your own pattern. That's something I did. When I was writing for workshops and things like that, I would look at books, I would look at magazines, how they lay out a pattern, and I would copy that template. You don't have to be a drawer of diagrams, by the way. That's not a thing. If you take photographs, that's enough. Clear, bright, still pictures, with nothing else. I'll tell you, it's funny, and I can't say that anybody sent a picture in like this, but I've been told in the past, you might get somebody who doesn't realize what's hanging on the radiator drying while they're taking a picture of.
Well, as a YouTuber, I have been I've done that mistake a couple of times. Like I'm so focused on what I'm taking a picture of, I don't realize, there's a copy of my will there. Maybe nobody should see that.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah,
my
I mean,
bank statement.
I do it too. I do it too. I mean, I was saying earlier, I have been filming, and the first one I did, when I looked back at it, I was like, I'm going to have to do it again. There was, like half a jar of jam or something in the corner of the shot the whole time. But yeah, it's like, so you film a bit or you take a picture and then you look at it and you don't look at what you're taking a picture of, you look around it, and you want a nice clear, because you can crop pictures. So as long as nice and clear around.
Do you do any technical editing for hire on contract?
I wouldn't not. I haven't been asked. I'd have to get a look at the pattern to see.
So as a technical editor, are you just checking the maths or are you just walking through all the steps to make sure they're covered? What are the things that you look out for?
Yes, to the answer to that. So when I tech edit, I don't necessarily start looking at the pattern first. I'll look at the quilt. You might do it. You're saying you like maths of quilts. I look at the quilt and I make assumptions about how the quilt is made. I mean, I'm still learning. I'm not going to know anything about everything about quilting, but I know a lot of techniques. So I tend to look, and generally, there are very few surprises in quilt making. And so I'll look at the quilt and there'll be certain assumptions. And then I'll look at the size of the quilt, and that will give me a pointer at the sizes the blocks could be. And I'll make assumptions in that respect. And then I'll go through the pattern. Hopefully everything lines up. But I'll be looking in the pattern to make sure fabric quantities are correct, to make sure that the cutting is correct. Information in a pattern, you need reference points through a pattern. And I think there are always helpful reference points, like when you're making blocks, well, what size are those blocks? Like unfinished sizes. So it's amazing how many patterns you go through. It's not mentioned. There's the size of the quilt is mentioned and the size of the pieces are mentioned. But when you're sewing a quilt and you've sewn, they might not necessarily be all square blocks, they might be rectangular. Mm-hmm. If you've got reference points like, well, that's going to be 10.5 inches, these are going to be 5.5 by 10.5, then it's going to fit together. So I look out for things like that.
So do you ever go back to a designer and say there's an easier way to do this?
No. And I don't, because a pattern is a bit like handwriting. People buy the magazine because there are different designers in it. So patterns will all be different. People have their own way of doing things. We format it so that it's always in the order. They're always in the same order. I will sit there and think, why have they done it that way? They could do it this way. But it's not for me to change that information. I'll change the maths if it's wrong, but I might ask a question like, okay, how did you applique that on? Because you'll get needle turn applique or you'll get bond web. It might be that reverse applique would have been easier. And I'm not asking the question, why didn't you do that? It's how did you do it? So then they explain to me how they've done it, and then we can make sure that's translated into the pattern. It's not for us to change the pattern any other way, if you know what I mean.
What is the most common correction that you make?
It'll be number of pieces, or some designers might make the same mistake. I think it's just things like it's generally numbers or sizes to cut, or templates. Do templates have add-on seam allowance, or do they include seam allowance? Things like that. I don't think there's a general common. It's whether the maths add up.
The pattern is submitted. You have edited it. Are you editing it in the program that it's going to be printed from, or does it go back to the designer, they make their changes, and then it comes?
When it comes to the magazine, it comes in a Word document, and it will come in the way they write it. We have a format we ask the designers to use. Not everybody does, and that's not really a big deal. The way we format in the magazine, we'll have a you will need. So our first thing is, here's all the fabric. So basically, if they see a pattern, a reader sees a pattern, they're like, all they have to do is look at the top of the page, and that's exactly what fabric they need for it. Whether they go and buy it or whether they have it in their stash, that's what they need. And then we'll have the cutting list. A designer might send the pattern in, and it might be so for, I don't know, economy square blocks, the cutting for the economy square blocks and how to make them. And then log cabins, the cutting for the log cabins and how to make them. We'll take all the cutting and take it to the top, so that the beginning of the pattern will be all the cutting, and then it will be, we'll have maybe how to make the economy squares, and you'll need pieces X, Y, and Z for that, and how to make, we'll lay it out like that. And that's the way we format. It doesn't go back to the designer. When a designer does a pattern for us, they put the pattern in and we format it for us, not for them.
So do you go through the magazine one more time before it's published to be sure all the corrections are made?
We go through it a lot. I might go through it 3 or 4 times, but production editor will go through it 3 or 4 times. The editor will go through it as well. We read them a lot.
Let's say I gave you a simple quilt, a cuddle quilt size project. How long would it take you to technically edit it?
I would have said 3/4 of a day, pretty much. A small quilt, half a day, 3/4 of a day. If, just the copy, just the words and checking references. Yeah, it's quite slow. I mean, you are literally, I print everything out, and that's so that I can, if there's lots of pieces, I do color code pieces, because there might be 10 fabrics. There might be, and you're making sure those fabrics are mentioned where they should be mentioned. It's very like a word Sudoku. Do you know what I mean? You are literally, you've got this information and it's got to appear in the cutting, it's got to appear in what you need, and then it's got to appear in where you're going to piece it. And then at the end, you're checking that all the pieces are, there. It's very interesting.
Well, thank God for people like you, because I'm not that way. I love the maths and everything, but I cannot see mistakes. I see the way I want it to be, and I also can see how it's done.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not necessarily writing all the steps down because I just know.
It's funny because since I started doing it, I've become aware that it is a niche thing. I don't think there are many of us about, and I do wonder how many technical editors are out there, because the magazine were a long time without a technical editor. When they found me, you have to have this weird love of the maths of it, and you have to be able to work backwards in a pattern. There's not many people who enjoy it for a start, I don't think.
I think that's the real key. Who enjoys doing it?
I mean, there's times I don't. There's times I get a pattern from somebody and I think, oh my goodness, what are you doing? But then most of the time at the end of it, I think, I made a good job of that pattern. That's good.
Are you a Bernina person?
Yes.
Did you get did I read that you just got a new one?
I've had it for 2 years. I had a Bernina sewing machine I got it when my daughter was a baby. So that was in 2000. And the new machine I bought, I think in 2022. I hated it when I got it, the new one, because my old one I'd had for so long, it was like it was part of me. I didn't have to think when I switched it on, like subtle foot movements and things like that with the machine. And this one I got was a very extravagant 7 Series Bernina. It does everything. And I hated it for ages. I really did. I thought, what have I done? But I have to admit, I love it. Wouldn't turn it back.
I always tell people, because I went through a very similar experience when I went from my very old Bernina to 750, that you almost need to take time to bond with your machine.
Oh, yeah.
Like you need to read the user manual, because it's a pretty big leap in features and how things work. I kept getting an error on my machine and I was frustrated because I'd had to press the reset button like 5 times when I was just sewing a seam. And it was just as simple as me leaving the bobbin door open.
Yes.
I didn't have to do that on my old one, right? I could leave that open, but on the new one, they don't like that.
No, they don't like it. Exactly. I had that exact same too. And also the one that bugged me straight away was it tells you when the bobbin is going to run out. And it isn't going to run out. You've got a little bit left on it. So you have got a little bit more sewing on it. But it's a bit like ink in a printer. It's telling you you've got no more ink, but actually you've got a good few prints out of it yet. Yeah. So I just switched that bit off. Once you learn, you can switch these things off. It's fab. What I will say is when I bought that first machine, I am a Bernina person because I love the Bernina 1/4-inch foot. Hands up, I think it's the best 1/4-inch foot on a machine. And that's just me. But when I went to buy this first Bernina, I had a budget of about £250. I don't know what that is in Canadian dollars.
Not enough to buy a Bernina.
Well, it's not. And I went to a quilt show. I got chatting to this guy who was selling machines. And I walked out of there and I'd spent £750. And that was back in 2000. It was in Edinburgh. And I drove home from Edinburgh to Glasgow, which is about an hour and a bit. The whole way home, I was thinking, how am I going to tell my husband what I've done? How am I going to tell him? And I said, it's my Christmas present for the next 5 Christmases. Let's put it that way. Do you know what? I used it every day for the last 15 years of its life. I really did. I mean, at the beginning, I was using it, once a week, or I wasn't sewing as avidly as I began once I started teaching. But I used that machine. I've still got it. It was a brilliant machine.
Still have mine too. I use it as my traveler.
Does it frustrate you because it doesn't have,
When I got the new machine, I thought, I'm never going to use that leg lift. I'm never going to use that automatic threader. And I use those two things a lot. So the one that I miss most is the leg lift.
Yes.
Because I use that all the
I've
time.
got that on my old machine, but I didn't ever use it.
The threader I love now, especially because my eyes are not as able as they used to be. So having that threader really helps.
Yeah. It's the thread cutter underneath that you just
thread cutter underneath, the thread cutter up here. There's all sorts of just really nice features on it. And I'm really beginning to embrace all the fancy stitches.
Yeah.
I sewed for 5 years with never touching one of them. And now I'm just adding to them. I just find there's a place for everything.
Yeah, I think that's right. And actually, I think whenever I've said to anybody about, because in classes, people would ask me, what sewing machine should I buy? Well, that's very difficult because everyone's got a different budget. Some people blow their budget, like me. It's very difficult because at the end of the day, I used to always say to people, well, everybody buys a different car. You've got your top of the range cars, and then you've got your everyday runarounds. It's about, you need to try them out and see. I did used to say to folk, buy one with more than you think you need, because you'll have that machine for a while. And, as you get to use it, you'll appreciate the things you didn't think you would use at the beginning. You will start to use them, So if you buy a really basic machine, guarantee in 2 or 3 years, you'll be frustrated and you'll be thinking, oh, I wish I'd done that.
Have you passed on your love of quilting to anybody in your family?
I have 2 daughters. And when they were smaller, I used to be the young quilters rep for Scotland. I helped out when the girls were small. I'd go to the guild meetings around Scotland and I would take my children and I would help out. So a friend who I know now, she was the young quilters rep back then. So I would help out at that. And then I became the young quilters rep. My older daughter, who's 27 now, she did textiles at art school. She did print. And she sews and she dressmakes and she's excellent that way. My younger daughter, who studied architecture, when she was about 9, said, Mum, stop asking me to come with you. I don't want to come anymore. So I was like, okay, I'm not going to force you. Now, as she's come through university and she's just towards the end of becoming an architect, she's still got her last bit to do. She's now interested in, she's got a bit more time. I'm saying getting one of my sewing machines because I have a few. Yeah, she's showing an interest there. So I'm going to get them in the end.
When I first contacted you, you were down in Bristol visiting the publication, I believe. What do you do when you go down there?
Generally, I work from Glasgow. I've been down, so we have been doing some filming. We have a Gathered website. And the Gathered website covers all crafts. So we have Simply Sewing magazine, we have Simply Crochet magazine, and Love Patchwork and Quilting, Today's Quilter, Simply Cross Stitch. There's a lot of craft magazines. And the Gathered website is like a forum for all of us where I think we can sell on Etsy, we can have information like sewing machines, what sewing machine should I buy? I did a review for the sewing machine I bought, actually. And it was an honest review, would I buy it again, sort of thing. It's like supposed to be a helpful forum for us. And we're trying to produce videos of techniques and skills and, go-tos for people. So I've done a little bit of that. I tend to go down for a reason like that.
So do you do much traveling for quilting?
Business or pleasure?
Both.
I always go to Birmingham to the Festival of Quilts. Yeah, always do that. I've been to Houston once.
Oh, wow.
That was really fun. And the conversation my friend and I have is, are we going again? When are we going?
Did you go to the Quilt Museum?
We did go to the quilt machine.
Yeah,
I
that's a nice
loved it.
little.
I mean, it's like funny to see it. People think, maybe people are like that, you know, when they come to Scotland, it's like it's on TV. But that's what it felt like going to these places. It just felt like it was on TV because America's so big and, you know.
So there's another chapter, I guess, now in the Modern Guild in South Lancaster. That must be a new one.
So there's a Glasgow Modern Quilt Guild. They have a very long waiting list. They're so nice, that group. They're a great group. They have a very long waiting list. I'm on it. The lady who started off this one, which she has a shop, Bigger Stitches, down in the South Lanarkshire, and she, I think, had been thinking about it for a while, and she put a note of interest out to folk who were on the waiting list and said if she started a group, would she be interested? And I thought, yay, great, this will be fun. Because actually, I don't often get a chance to go and just sew in a group. Wherever I've been in a group, I'm usually showing somebody what to do. So it's going to be a real treat for me.
They are fun. I really enjoy guilds.
Yeah.
I find the exchange of ideas, just you pitch in and help here, or people will pitch in and help you. I just find them really nice places. Now, I know there's a lot of people that don't feel that way, but they've always been good to me.
Yeah, I will say one of the things that having given up teaching really now, I didn't give up the teaching straight away when I started doing this job. I kept my evening classes going and I was doing the magazine during the day and teaching at night. And part of that was entirely about the people. Although I was a teacher, there was something really lovely about sharing ideas and working with people making quilts. And, like in my groups, it wasn't necessarily that somebody would bring in a pattern for a quilt and they were following a pattern. It was much more organic. And I really missed that, so I'm really looking forward to it. It's going to be once a month.
Do you put a label on your quilts?
Sometimes, which is terrible because I'm forever saying to people, I have an old 1930s quilt that I bought in an antique place and it is the prettiest quilt and I have no idea who made it. And I think about that all the time. So I should say yes. I'll have to sit and label all my quilts that I've made.
I've just started going back and labeling all my quilts. I'm usually good at keeping the current ones labeled, but it's going back and doing the old ones.
Yeah. I think it's important actually. And just because you're saying that, I'm like, I really should make a point of doing that. If I make a quilt for somebody, then I do. I put the date on it and I put their name on it and I put my name on it. I should do more of that because they'll just get lost. And quilts will last forever. I mean, they do last forever.
They last a long time. And it's amazing how much love gets part of the quilt as it ages too. So that people, would start shredding and people, no, I got to keep my quilt.
There's something so friendly about a quilt. There really is. I don't know what it is. The first time I saw quilts properly was in New York. And it was with the art school. We went to New York for a week on a study trip. And we were it was the Folk Art Museum. I was 21 because I could have alcohol, but some of my friends who weren't 21, they couldn't. It was the Folk Art Museum has moved now because I've been back and been to the new one. But we went in and we were heading to the jewellery section because we were there as a study trip because of the jewellery and silversmithing. And we had to walk through this part of the museum and there were quilts hanging high up. And they were like album quilts, a lot of applique. And I remember so clearly thinking, what is this? What is this? I'd never seen quilts like them. What is this? And I wanted to stay with the quilts, but I couldn't because we had to move on and go to the jewellery. So once we'd been to the jewellery, but I went to the shop. We had a little time in the museum before we moved on to the next place we were going. And I went into the shop and I bought postcards and like books of wrapping paper that had quilts in them, and like it was quilt stuff that I bought. And at the time, I didn't quite know what I was looking at. Like it must have been several years later, it dawned on me when I had started properly quilting, that memory of seeing those quilts and the effect it had on me, and it's never gone away.
So now looking back, are you surprised it took you so long to come to quilting?
I don't know if I'm surprised. When I went to art school and I was in drawing and painting, I knew I wanted to stay at art school. And I remember thinking, what is it I'm going to do? And I considered textiles. And I didn't pick textiles, and I went to jewellery and silversmithing, and I don't regret it because I learned a lot. I learned a lot about making and finishing, and basically you're making for somebody else. So there's a quality to your work. But I didn't pick textiles because I thought, and I laugh at this now, what if I get bored? What if I grow to hate it? When I look back now, if I had the chance to do it again, sometimes I think that was complete madness. Maybe I would have got here quicker. Do you know what I mean? The only reason I'm doing what I'm doing is because of the pandemic. I work remotely, and that wouldn't have happened without the pandemic. There are no magazines up here.
Have you experimented with other fabrics other than quilting cotton?
Yeah, I've used things like silks, and I've done the Korean transparent patchwork. Can't remember
Bojagi.
Yeah, I've been experimenting with that. We had a new front door fitted, and it had a glass window, and I was like, I don't want to bung up a blind. What am I going to do? I don't want a net curtain. What am I going to do? So that's what I made, and it's so nice. Yeah, so I'll have a go at anything. I have a big stash, Karen. I've got a massive stash of all sorts. I do a lot of dressmaking also. I think made denim quilt with all the kids' jeans with wool and tweed. There's no rules.
Yeah, there are no rules. There are no rules. Just have fun. What is your favorite part of the quilting process?
I think it's a bit like a book when you're reading a book. It's probably about 3/4 of the way through. Because at the beginning, you're cutting, and sometimes that can be dull, or squaring up thousands of half square triangles or whatever. I think probably about halfway, 3/4 of the way through piecing, and you're starting to see things come together, a bit like this. So this was all hand sewn. I enjoyed doing that. But then it's like, okay, what's happening next? And then I decided on the sashings. And then as the sashings were coming together, and I made a few, there's a point where you're like, God, this is going to be really nice. About halfway, 3/4 of it, and then you just think, well, and then it's suddenly flying, and then the sad bit is at the end. There's always a sad bit when you finish the binding. It's nice to see the quilt finished, but I always have a slight sadness when I finish a quilt.
I often find when I'm putting on that binding, when I'm hand sewing that binding on, that I'm going through a little grieving process.
Yeah, I think that's right. I do. I think I do. Don't get me wrong, there's something nice when you're folding them up, and you're like, oh, look what I made. But okay, I have to start again.
You go back and you remember all the bits.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time and coming on the show. It's been delightful talking with you. If people want to get a hold of you, how do they get a hold of you?
Through the magazine. If you email the magazine, that's the way to do it. We get lots of letters. Usually the technical letters come to me, but if you put my name on it, email the magazine, and it will come straight through to me.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I've said it already, but I'm going to say goodbye again. Thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Learned a lot, and I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you very much.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Paula Hope. I loved her tips for submitting a pattern for publication. If you are interested in contacting Paula, I will leave a link to today's quilter. If you want to check out what projects she's been working on, I'll leave a link to her Instagram account there as well. And if you love the Dutch sampler pattern as much as I do, I'll leave a link to the Etsy shop there. Next time you're in your sewing room, be sure to have Karen's Quilt Circle playing in the background. I have interviewed so many interesting people on this show. Let one inspire you. Take care, and I'll see you next time.